Have you ever wondered about life's biggest questions? Like, why am I here? What happens when we die? Or what else is out there? Well, we have, and we love to talk about it. And if you're listening, we think you probably do too. I'm Robyn.
And I'm Karen. And we've spent our lives searching for those answers, and we're seekers just like you.
We'll be talking to some of the most fascinating spiritual teachers, healers, and scientists, and showing you how you can use some of their spiritual practices for yourself.
We'll also be sharing stories of other seekers to motivate you to live your fullest life.
And we'll be translating it all, so the spiritual stuff won't feel so out there.
So if you're curious, get ready to rediscover why we're here together. We are all seekers. We're all seeking something from the moment we wake up, whether it's joy, truth, love, fulfillment, answers, money. The list could go on. And we all have our secret journeys so far. We featured many of them on Seeking with Robyn.
Recently, I was catching up with my former colleague and friend, Peggy Panosh, from my Oprah days. We've kept up with one another through mutual friends and social media, but we haven't had a good catch up in quite some time. My Oprah family are like college friends. We've spent so much time together over the many years that even if we don't talk for a while, you pick up right where you left off. Over the last few years, I've been in awe at Peggy's next chapter. She continues to be a sought-after marketing expert, and she's also become renowned for her illustrations and artwork. Her illustrations capture the heart and spirit of people, places, and moments that touch her soul. She even had her first book published, Billions of Besties, which you'll hear all about. I spent so much time with Peggy, and I had never seen her draw. I needed to know more about how this all came to be. A spiritual trip triggered an unlocking, and it's a story you all need to hear. Peggy, tell us about growing up Peggy and what led to your whole career in radio and TV and marketing.
I was born and raised in Green Bay, Wisconsin. I am one of 5 children. I'm the second oldest and the oldest daughter. My father was an engineer and a technician in radio and television. My mother was a homemaker for our young life and then worked in the medical profession in an administrative role. We're a close family. I'm super close to my brothers and sisters. We weren't big travelers, I think partly because we had a huge family and partly, it's expensive to travel 5 kids around. So we spent summers in Door County, which was just lovely and idyllic and wonderful. I was raised in the Lutheran religion. I never really got it. I went through catechism and it was always just sort of a chore and a burden. It was never anything that I really connected to. I was an adventurous kid. I was a curious kid. I wanted to do everything. I had a lot of friends, and also high school, I was introduced to drugs and alcohol and, kind of went to town exploring that. So I did hallucinogens at a really young age and smoked a lot of pot and hash and stuff like that. I took 2 gap years before I went to college. At the University of Wisconsin, I worked as a DJ. I lived with 3 roommates and we were just wild. I was a radio, television, film major. And interestingly, not that I consciously wanted to follow in my dad's footsteps, but subconsciously, I sort of did just on a different level. I was super involved with student programming at the university, social events and political events and all sorts of things. So that really helped round me out in addition to my academics. So I was highly functioning, but I was still partying a lot. After I graduated from college, I moved to Chicago for 5 minutes and then met somebody at a New Year's Eve party who lived in New York and worked for Catch a Rising Star. And Catch a Rising Star was a comedy club in New York City. They were opening clubs around the country, signing comedians to TV and movie deals and yada, yada, yada. He said, we're doing an IPO. We're going public. You should come work for us. And I said, great. What's an IPO? I didn't know anything. So I hopped on a plane, flew to New York, moved into a 1-bedroom apartment with a college friend in Greenwich Village. Worked for Catch a Rising Star for 3 years. And it was a great time because it was like when people Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David and Adam Sandler, all these guys were just starting out. And then I was tapped by Infinity Broadcasting and K-Rock Radio for a marketing director job. Their morning guy was Howard Stern. And it was rock music the rest of the day. So they wanted someone who could work with talent. So that's why they hired me. The interesting thing is, I remember when I first met him, I had to wait late because he was meditating. So his office, when I went up for the interview, I met with the general manager of the station, I met with the program director, and then they wanted me to meet him. And they said, oh, you'll have to wait 15 minutes because he's meditating. And that was
you talking about Howard Stern?
Yeah, oh my God, he's been doing TM for a zillion years. His mother has probably been doing TM, I would say 50 or 60 years. But that was the first time I heard about it. It was also around that time I sobered up. I stopped drinking. So I was, partying pretty hard up until that point. So now we're around 1990. I went in AA, the whole bit. And really, that's when also I started working on my conscious contact with God. Now, even thinking about it in retrospect, it's like how that coincided with actually hearing about what meditation was. I never really knew, but I also knew working at the station, Howard's office was literally right next to mine. He would meditate the first thing he came off the air. And that's when I started, bearing witness, it's a practice.
Did you ever talk to him about it, about why he did it or what he got out of it? Did he ever share any of that with you? Just curious.
He's shared it very publicly. He is an incredibly present person. And, when he's on the air and off, my experience with him is he stands in his truth. So whether you love him or hate him, he is very true to who he is. I will also say that professionally, working with him and working with K-Rock Radio and Infinity Broadcasting at that time, it was a remarkable experience. It was fun. It was fascinating. Radio is a very immediate medium. So unlike television, in radio, you can write something out, give it to me. I can say it. It's on the air in 2 seconds. And also it's like theater of the mind. So it's very intimate. So you only your mind, your eye visualizes what you're hearing. And oftentimes have headphones in or you're in a car. So it's just you and whatever you're listening to. And it was a heightened experience. Also too, what I loved about that time in my career is I was able to do a lot because I demonstrated that I could get stuff done, that I was trustworthy, but also it's like I had, good judgment and a good, healthy curiosity and enough badassery. We could do great things. So yeah, it was a great time. And then it would led to City Broadcasting did a reverse takeover of CBS. The two radio syndication companies merged, CBS Radio Networks and Westwood One. So I became the head of marketing, communications and promotions for the combined radio network. So we were the biggest syndicator in the world. We had everything from the Olympics to the Grammys to the Super Bowl, you name it, we syndicated it. So it was a great playing field.
As I'm listening to you, I'm thinking, I wonder in your life where you decided to get sober and you're having all these experiences at work and opening up to, wait, there's something bigger going on in addition to what I'm doing day to day from an astrological perspective, which I don't know if you've looked at, but I'm wondering if that's when your Saturn returned, which is usually, it happens between the ages of 28 and 32 ish is when that happens. And I wonder for you if that was.
That's when that's 30 to 32 is when this stuff is happening.
That to me is
by the way, that's also when I started traveling.
Being in radio in New York at that age with that much pressure going on around you, getting sober could not have been just I'm just going to do it. It had to have been a real conscious shift for you.
It was very much a conscious shift. And I had the good fortune. I was able to make friends who are still my very best friends today, who are also in the program. So that kind of fellowship and support made a huge difference. But also, I think I hit my bottom. So I was ready and open for change, transformation, and more.
Something specific happened that you're willing to share, Peggy?
That I sobered up?
Mm-hmm.
It was, I'm laughing because I was just so out of control. It was the late 80s. So my 31-year anniversary was just on January 28th. I had become a blackout drinker and I was in Vermont with one of my best friends at the time, who's still a really close friend today. We were staying at a friend's house and I had blacked out for almost an entire weekend. That was a culmination of 8 months of real recklessness that I was scared. I was really, really scared.
That will level you right to your knees to say like, help me, I need to figure this out.
Yeah. And also I was powerless. That's the first step. I was powerless over drugs and alcohol. I was in a place where I was ready to admit that. I didn't know what was next, but I was ready to admit that.
That's brave. And even if you are someone who hasn't hit that with drugs and alcohol, I was actually just having this conversation recently about how in this last year, let's say you're an overdoer, you're addicted to you could be addicted to so many different things.
Yes.
And people can relate even in this last year to being stopped in their tracks and having to actually like look at themselves because they can't just do. That's what you learned then.
Yeah.
To look at yourself.
Yeah.
So that was around the time that you decided to do some of the traveling. Robyn said you went to 70 countries or something.
So at the same time, I started doing traveling and little trips. And then I was doing modeling for this painter. Her name was Gunilla Feigenbaum. So I would go and pose and she would paint and we would talk. And I was telling her that I had vacation time coming up and I had nobody to travel with. Like my regular playmates couldn't break away. And she said, go by yourself. And that was the first time I was like, oh, it never occurred to me I was probably like 30, 31. And she said, go by yourself. And I said, okay. And she said, make your first trip someplace easy. So I decided Bermuda. I learned to be really comfortable traveling alone and really loving traveling alone because I also have some very good friends that I love traveling with. But, if they're not available or if they've already been where I want to go, like I have no problem picking up and going by myself. What I learned very quickly is it's a different kind of presence. I remember that first trip to Bermuda, I felt myself differently. I was able to savor things differently. I was slower. I was still like insecure, but also that helped me be vulnerable. Very quickly got much more adventurous about my destinations. And I would also find that naturally, a lot of the places that I would be drawn to had like architecture that touched my soul and ancient mysteries and sacred spaces that I really like. Places like Chichen Itza in Mexico or Angkor Wat in Cambodia or Tiger's Nest or any of the monasteries in Bhutan or, the Shwedagon Pagoda in Yangon in Burma, Bali, like each place I went, there was sort of a different sort of transformation that would happen, a different sort of presence, being able to be in these places where people practice their spiritual connections, with God or their higher power or however they believed, but to be able to have the good fortune to be able to physically go to these places and experience them was something that I never took for granted. Travel also became a spirit. Like I remember I climbed Kilimanjaro and with my friend Robyn, and I didn't summit though. I got altitude sickness at the last base camp and had to come down. So that's on my list to go back and actually summit. One thing that you get local guides that must go up with you. What the guides say to you is pole pole, and pole pole means slow down. But what he would also say, savor, savor, savor. Yeah, so travel very much became a way for me to contact with that which is greater than myself and also connect with the people and really learn from them. And it still is one of my greatest joys and pleasures. And it makes me crazy that I can't hop on a plane and get my passport stamped.
I think it's so interesting too, as somebody who was raised Lutheran and was not particularly excited about religion in any way, found such fascination when you went and traveled at everyone else's religion. It was like a different kind of observation, maybe.
Well, it was a need though, because I think the need since I was little was always there to connect with a power that was greater than myself. It didn't make sense. I was forced to memorize scripture rather than explaining to me, what does this mean? Like, I don't get it. I think the desire was always there. Looking back, there was a knowing there, even as a little kid, there was a knowing. When I was ready to go, I went.
Well, that's what I was wondering, because not everybody has the travel bug, right? Not everybody has I hope that we all have this want of knowing about something bigger than ourselves. I hope that that's the case, but I don't think everyone has it in the same way. So it doesn't sound like that it was coming from necessarily your family or your everyday. It was like your own thing.
It was
totally the curiosity to be able to go and to do it by yourself.
When I went to Burma, it was, under military rule. And I remember, I got there and I was on this extended trip around Southeast Asia. Robyn, this was actually right before I moved to Chicago from New York. I had quit my job in New York. I broke up with my boyfriend of 10 years. I sold my apartment. I was like, I'm done with all of this. And I went to Southeast Asia and tripped around, but I was in Thailand and it took a while to get my visa to go into Burma. I finally did it. I was like so excited, but it was also like, it was a very difficult time to be in that country like it is now. But I remember I got there, I put my stuff in my hotel, and then I walked around. The big Buddhist temple is the Shwedagon Pagoda, which is just like, it's huge. It's massive. It's like it's unbelievable. And I was walking around and this monk came up to me and he said, "Are you American?" And I said, "Yes." And he said, "Will you come speak at my school?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Come here tomorrow morning at 9:00. I said, "Okay." And then I was like, wait, what did I just agree to? And, keep in mind that, it's like young military guys with with machine guns. And I went back to my hotel and I went to the concierge and I said, "What is this?" And he said, "Look, that's how school kids learn what's happening outside of the country is from tourists coming and speaking at the school. So they do this under the radar because there's no internet. They have no access to outside news. They don't know what's happening other than what the junta is feeding them." So anyway, the next morning I got up, I went to the school, which was on these crowded streets and it was on the second floor above this noodle shop. And I go into the class and there's probably, I don't know, like 100 kids in this class ranging from, I would say like 10 to 18. And I see the monk and he said, "The American, you come, go." And he puts me in front of the class. He said, "Just speak English." And he said, because that's how they learn how to speak English. And I said, "Oh, okay." Well, so I'm in front of a chalkboard and I said, "Okay, so my name is Peggy. I flew here from New York City." I drew a really bad map of the world. And I said, "Here's New York City. I flew to Los Angeles, then to Singapore." Just gave them the basics. I work in New York. And then, told them a little about myself. And then the first kid raises their hand. The first question was, "Are you married?" And I said, "No, I'm not." The second question was, "Why not?" But I asked the monk after, I said, "Why did you come up to me?" And he said, "One, because you look like an American tourist. And number two is because," he said, you seemed present." Yeah.
That's really cool. And just think about like however long ago that trip was and how that has stayed with you.
Oh yeah, I'll never forget it.
That's like a meant to be moment for you.
Mm-hmm.
You were at the right time in the right place for that monk to see you.
Look, I could have said no.
Exactly.
I could have been fearful and said no.
And you also strike me as someone who does not live in fear because you wouldn't have traveled.
Well,
right?
I don't live in fear, but I experience fear. So
yes, I think that's different.
Yeah.
Though.
In some respects, fear has been a great motivator, a great driver to do things that I'm not comfortable doing. I've also learned that fear is often a feeling that isn't a fact. I experience fear. I recognize fear. Sometimes it takes me a minute to recognize that what I'm feeling is fear, but also I don't live in it because I have the tools to walk through it.
Yeah.
And the tools meaning, I have meditation, I have prayer, I have the fellowship of going to meetings to help me deal with it.
Well, and it's a trusting both in yourself and in that something bigger. That
it also seems, Peggy, that you're also driven by that spirit of adventure too.
Yes.
There's something that happens to you when you get to those places that surmounts any fear.
Yeah. And it's just that's where the magic happens.
Let's talk about the fact that you decided to quit your job. You went to Southeast Asia and then you moved to Chicago, which is, I know, where you and I met. And I actually remember sitting with you. You hadn't even accepted the job at Harpo yet. And you were telling me all about this trip and all about what happened.
I remember
that conversation stuck with me because you inspired me.
Oh, you're kidding.
No, I remember thinking you did all that on your own. And yeah. I found that I hadn't met many people at that point who had done all of that on their own and made all these decisions and changed their life.
Oh, I love that.
So tell us how that happened.
So I left New York and I decided to move to Chicago and volunteer on Obama's first presidential campaign. And it was also, I was able to be back in the Midwest. My mother's health started declining. So I could still be in a big city, but still get, to be of service to my mother very easily within like a couple of hours. I was introduced to Harriet by a mutual friend in New York, Harriet Seidler, who we love. Harriet and I started talking. I started as a consultant, and then a position was created after a few months of consulting. And so that's how and I was actually only going to do it for like, a couple of years and then go back to New York. And it was almost 9 years later. I was like,
I remember. You were like,
yeah.
This is just going to be a blip.
This is just going to be just for a second. God, what a wonderful adventure that was.
Yeah. And would you say that your experiences, both from traveling and maybe even from a spiritual place, continued?
100%. Because I even think that, Oprah's message, there was such a wonderful high bar of excellence and such amazing colleagues, including you, like just really formidable people who knew how to move mountains. And there was a fearlessness, an intelligent fearlessness that existed throughout. There were two big things. One is just working from a place of intention. And that clarity is something that it's exactly one of the reasons why I ended up there, but I didn't even know it. But is to learn what that meant and to be intentional about life decisions, business decisions, choices, thinking, was a total game changer and absolutely transformative. And then the other thing was, you remember, Robyn, it was a sign in Oprah's office, but I think it was Dr. Jill Bolte Taylor who said, you're responsible for the energy that you bring into this room.
It's such a powerful statement. Yes.
Yes. It was like, that was the, other big giant learning. Do you remember, Robyn, in my office, I had this, it was a very crude drawing and it wasn't mine. It was like two circles. So there was a little circle inside of a big circle. So since this is a podcast, I'm trying to describe it. And so inside the little circle, it said, this is where you are. And then outside of the little circle and on the space, it said, this is where the magic happens. It's like this vast space. That was my North Star. But where the magic happens is, with intentionality and also for me with presence. Mm-hmm. And I am responsible for energy I bring into any space, any room, any person, any relationship, any endeavor that I do.
We need to take responsibility for the energy we bring to the room.
And also for me, it was like to be aware of it.
It's so true.
Yes. But and I am also so aware of it now. I'm aware of my own energy, but also like I can tell, like when you would come into my office or I would come into yours, the energy was always like super good and vibey, right? We also know that the spaces that we would go in where the energy wasn't that,
Yes.
Right. And it was
like, you can see it becomes tangible. It becomes a tangible thing. Yes.
And so many people don't know it. That's the sad thing. It's like it's so easy, right? To get sucked into the soup of everybody else's energy and to get lost in that and then just feel like it's you, but it's not yours. And the fact that even the fact, Peggy, that you drew the circle, you drew a circle around your own little energy because you almost have to do that in those situations, right? But it's the recognition that that's what you have the control over. That's so important.
Well, and that we also have the power to change our vibe, right? So none of us are perfect, and we go through our ups and downs even within a day, right? But if 100%. You can be aware enough to be like, I feel really low vibe right now. What can I do to change that? As long as you're aware of it and what you're bringing both to yourself and to others, if everybody was aware of that, this world would be a very different place.
Well, it would just think about it, because if we were all aware all the time, we would be energizing good vibes and the collective consciousness would be just positive. It cemented something that I already knew. And that is, wherever I go, I take myself with me. So even if I try to escape, run, flee, whatever, I'm still with myself.
Yes. And you can't blame others for how you're feeling. And I think that is, people go to method is to blame others for their bad mood or for putting them in a bad mood. That changes the game when you understand you are responsible and then, you can change that yourself.
That's right.
So then you left Chicago.
So I moved back to New York. So I had, for the 20 years before I moved to Chicago, I'd always lived in Manhattan. So when I moved back, I thought, this time I want to live in Brooklyn, So Howie Green, my real estate agent, who is also like a comedian. He's so funny. So anyway, he found this amazing apartment in Dumbo, Brooklyn. Dumbo meaning down under the Manhattan Bridge overpass. So it's this great little enclave, hip, beautiful, gorgeous views of the city right at the foot of the Brooklyn Bridge. It was amazing. I continued to do consulting work for OWN with Harriet. I started getting other consulting clients. And then I decided that I wanted to just stop everything and like take an intentional year off. So I did. And I was very untethered. Like I was not comfortable. I wasn't used to it. I was always used to having, sort of my career to define my purpose. And so I didn't have that. And also, days are never long enough for me. I'd like to do so many things and experience so many things. So suddenly I had all of this time and I was like, wait, what? It was very overwhelming. And I went on this trip to Santa Fe with my two best friends, Robyn and Jen. We went to this place called Sunrise Springs, great shamans and practitioners. And, my intention of that experience was I wanted to get just cracked open like an egg. I didn't know what I was looking for or wanted. All I knew is that I was completely surrendered to the experience and whatever it had to offer. There was absolutely a power greater than myself at work. So, we go, it's the kind of places where, there's a sweat lodge, you do a vision guide. There's all these different things that you can do. So have you ever done a sweat lodge?
I have not.
Okay.
I look forward to doing it, but I have not done it yet.
I've done it a few times. So actually the day before the sweat lodge, about an hour outside of Santa Fe, we went to these hot springs and sit in these springs. And it's an out of body experience. It's like really amazing because it's almost like it's a cleansing, it's a release. And I remember going back to Santa Fe, I got really sick. Like on the side, I had to have the driver pull over at the side of the road. But
you think it was from the cleansing, from like whatever?
100%. It was just purging. And then, so a sweat lodge, which I only did for a second because I just did this purging, but I've done sweat lodges in other places. So you take off your clothes. If you're comfortable, if the heat, you literally sweat out toxins, but also you allow the spirits to come in and guide you through this experience. And it is a remarkable experience. I also did this hike with this vision guide.
And I want to point out that you did not do ayahuasca.
No.
I just want people who are listening.
Yeah, I did not do ayahuasca. I can't do ayahuasca because it would be a slip. I don't know if it's similar, but it was a dramatic and dynamic and amazing experience. I think it was one of the last days in Santa Fe. We were outside. It was a beautiful sunny day by this medicine wheel. And the shaman said, find your place. The three find a place separate apart from each other and sit, and I will come find you. So I'm sitting under this tree. It's a beautiful, I'm like laying, and I was transported back to when I was a teenager, laying in our backyard on Town Hall Road, looking up at trees, blue sky. I mean, I was there. And then she came by and she dropped off. She sat down next to me, paper and some pens, and she walked away. And so I was kind of in a trance. So I came out and I just started doodling, and it wasn't good, but I liked it. And then after that, we had another experience with another woman who we did sort of this work with black paint and paintbrushes. Actually, we let our spirits guide our emotions with the paintbrush. And it was like, that was really like otherworldly and great. And okay, fine. So, and then after they flew back to their respective homes, I hopped to my Jeep, went to Abiquiu, went to George O'Keeffe's studio, and I'd been there before, but it experienced it completely differently. And then Abiquiu, which is where she lived, I mean, the canyons, the mountains look like paintings. I felt it. So I got back to New York. I went to, the art supply store. I got some pens, some stuff, and I just started drawing like every day. Like after, I meditate in the morning, I would just draw for like a half hour. And the more I drew, the more I liked it. And the more I liked it, the better I got. And I would also push myself. And then I started posting stuff on Instagram. And then, do you know the show CBS Sunday Morning?
Yeah.
So I saw that they use suns as interstitials on the show. So I thought, well, I'm going to send them draw a bunch of suns and send them. So I did. I get an email from this woman, and her title is producer/sun coordinator. She said, we love your work. We're going to use some of these. I said, okay, great. So that opened up for me. And then Rosewood Hotels and Resorts, I started doing work for them. And then one of the Soho House outlets in Manhattan, Ludlow House, I did an artist in residence, and I did a piece that they featured and sold at the house that raised money for a women's shelter, but as things started happening. And one day I was driving out to my friend Susie's house, Susie Aaron's in New Jersey. And I was listening to NPR and I was listening to this interview with Beanie Feldstein. And she was talking about the movie Booksmart and studying friendships. I thought, God, friendships, that's our best friends. There are millions of them. There are billions of them. Oh my God, billions of besties. Wouldn't that be a fun book? And I got to Susie's, and I remember this was in July of 2019. I said, Susie, what do you think about doing a book? It's called Billions of Besties. It's a book about best friends. She's like, yeah, okay. And then the next week I had a meeting with Teresa DeMasi, a publisher at Simon & Schuster, who was introduced to me by my friend Jennifer. And what I wanted her to do was just look at my drawings and let me know if I had game. And so she looked at me and she said, yeah, I like your stuff. And she said, do you have any ideas for a book? And I said, yeah, how about Billions of Besties, blah, blah, blah. And she said, I'll greenlight that book right now. And she said, do you know how to write a book proposal? And I said, no. And she said, okay, here's sort of the format, blah, blah, blah. So I went back to Susie. I said, Susie, this thing has the green lights. We started the book in fall of 2019 and it was published last October. Billions of Besties. A celebration of fascinating and simply exceptional friendships. So,
and think about how that came to you. We always talk about actually how long drives, somehow it like allows spirit or something bigger than ourselves to come in, because it's like we get in a zone, right? You're in a zone, you're listening, and somehow you're hearing the whispers differently. Don't you think?
100%. Also, it's like Elizabeth Gilbert says, I heard her say this one time and it's so true. She said, creativity is flying around all over the place. It's just looking for places and people and vessels to come out. I 1,000,000,000% believe that's what happened here.
It was what you said when you were going to Santa Fe. It was like the first time in your life that you were, I love you use the word untethered. You were untethered from work. You had kind of released that. And so then you opened yourself up to the possibilities. And then that whole experience opened up your spirit in a way that it never had the freedom to explore before.
Yes.
So it just seems like it evolved. Like it just was like, oh my gosh, there's my chance.
Yeah.
And I think I would love for everybody watching or listening to understand that I've spent a lot of time with Peggy prior to this, and I'd never seen her draw. So
what I described when I was under that tree and I was 17 years old. So in high school and like grammar school and high school, I would draw. I remember making paper dolls for my sisters. And I remember like taking art class in high school, but I would make like, bongs, you know what I mean? Like it wasn't, I wasn't. And I remember my mother too, is that she encouraged my art. But at the time I just, I wasn't in a place to like feel it. So it's all over 40 years later, I started illustrating.
Well, and that's what I want everybody to take in, that we may have these gifts we don't even know about, and they may not come to you until later in life. Like you just don't know. I mean, in a million years, you wouldn't have thought,
no,
this is what you'd be doing now after this unbelievable career that you've had in radio and TV and digital and experiential stuff. I mean, not to say that that's gone, but this is a whole new chapter.
And you know what I maybe realized too? Like I didn't get the note until later that you can be more than one thing. I was very, very linear, very one-dimensional in my career pursuit because I always thought, you drive, you find a goal and you drive toward it. But yeah, it's like you realize I can do both and other things. I was like in a place to receive this ability and this talent.
Well, and then I feel like you listened to the whisper. And I know for all of us, because, we've been in the Oprah world in some way for a while, that term, right? Like listen to the whispers before it becomes but you listened to the whisper, got back from that trip. You didn't let it go. You allowed yourself to be in it, and look where it's taken you.
Yeah.
I mean, you actually have your own, you have a book.
I know. And also too, I had a good creative partner. Susie is, a terrific writer. Like the whole thing worked well. It like vibed really well. Plus, it's interesting because it's a book about friendships, and and celebrating friendships. And there's 10 chapters in the books. And, it's like classic best friends and, Hollywood best friends and unexpected best friends. But, it came out in October. And if you look at last year and sort of all the vitriol and all the negativity and all the difficult things that we still have to deal with, but just like all of that negative, heavy, intensely troubling energy that we were dealing with, we were both so proud to be able to put out a body of work that was about delight and celebration and friendships, and that which brings us together rather than that which pulls us apart. So in our own little way, this little piece of light, Billions of Besties, does exactly that.
I love that you call it a piece of light.
That's exactly what it is. It's like we have this ability to put this positivity and gifts out into the world.
And I want to just add to that, because I think now, our whole world has changed. Our perspectives have changed. I was just talking to someone this morning about how isolated still a lot of people are. Friendships have become even more important than ever before because they can be your only outlet. The book is even more important to shine that light. And I was just reading a footnote about the book, and it says, our best friends are our soulmates. They understand us when no one else does, lift us up, and bring out the best in us. It's a relationship based on a bond that can't always be described, but it's always magical.
It's so true.
And I just love that, because sometimes I think it's easy to take friendships for granted, but we all need those besties that understand our heart and soul. It's a book of celebration that I think needed to be published. And the way you illustrate, there's no way you can imagine that you weren't always doing this. When you see the illustrations, they just feel so part of your DNA. Like they've obviously been in there a long time, just waiting.
And they have personality. You're capturing personality, but I see your own personality in there too. They're so unique and distinct, and they are pieces of light.
Yes.
Do you have a favorite?
There's a few. So I think we have a chapter of unexpected friendships. And so my favorite is RBG and Antonin Scalia. And because they were dear, close, good friends, but they were politically opposed. They were on the absolute opposite end of the spectrum, but they went to the opera together. They traveled the world together with their, his wife and her husband together. They would have dinner parties. They loved spending time together, but they fundamental things that right now are tearing people apart. There's another one. There's Hunter Thompson and Pat Buchanan. Again, opposite ends of the spectrum. Later in life, they spoke to each other every single day, but they were as opposite can be. So those are some of my favorites. I love, Oprah and Gail, obviously, this quintessential, my best friend. I love Letterman and Bill Murray, David Bowie and Lou Reed, Thelma and Louise, all these fictional characters
right. Yes.
that were so defining. There are real ones, there's cartoon ones, there are imaginary ones, but it's all, about the same thing. It's like what you said, Karen, that magic, that alchemy that brings people together, however that connection comes alive for you.
Is there anything else that you would want to share with people who are seekers?
Yes. So be open to what's possible and don't write the end of the script. It's we know what we know. We don't know what we don't know. It's always been in that space of what I don't know. That's where I've been able to learn more about who I am and what I have the capacity and the ability to do for myself and for other people. Enjoy the journey. I am still very much a work in progress. There is, I have a long way to go. And I will say that there have been very difficult parts of my journey, but I wouldn't trade anything. Be present.
And know you can be more than one thing.
And know that you can be more than one thing. And also just continuously energize good vibrations, because it makes a difference for yourself and for the world.
Peggy, thank you for being you. Really, thank you for putting out light in this universe. Thanks for being a light in this universe. Thanks for being my friend.
Oh, it's my God. Thank you.
I'm so fortunate. I'm so glad that you and Karen now know each other.
Yes.
And really, thanks for sharing your journey. And thank you for living the life you've lived so far. And I'm just so excited to see where else you're going to go.
And by the way, back at you, sister. I feel the same way. It's, thank you for asking me to join both of you today. And Robyn, I love seeing, I've known you for, 15 years more. So I love to see like what's happening in this part of your life and what you're giving back to the world. So back at you, sister.
Thank you. I love you.
Love your besties.
Yes, to besties.
Besties. All right. Love
I
you
love
too.
you.
Bye, Peggy. Such a pleasure.
Bye, Peggy. Visit peggypanosh.com, PEGGYPANOSH.com to find out more about her book, artwork, and marketing consulting offerings. You can also follow Peggy on Instagram at Peggy Panosh.